There's something almost magical about standing in front of an ancient sculpture, feeling the weight of its silent presence, as if the stone itself could speak. Look closely, and you'll notice the subtle curve of a lip hinting at a smile, the furrowed brow of determination, or the relaxed stance of a figure exuding calm authority. These aren't just carvings, they're frozen moments of human emotion, crafted with such precision that they still resonate with us thousands of years later. How did artists from civilizations long gone manage to infuse cold, unyielding rock with such warmth and vitality? That's the mystery we're about to unravel. Think about the last time a piece of art made you stop in your tracks. Maybe it was the intensity in a statue's gaze, or the way its pose seemed to defy gravity. Ancient sculptors didn't have the tools we do today, yet they achieved something modern technology still struggles to replicate: the illusion of life. From the rigid, timeless perfection of Egyptian pharaohs designed to project eternal power, to the fluid, almost breathing musculature of Greek athletes, every chisel mark was a deliberate choice. These artists weren't just shaping stone, they were encoding stories, beliefs, and even political propaganda into their work, and the most fascinating part: they did it all without a single written word. What if I told you that these sculptures were more than just art? They were ancient world's version of social media, a way to communicate ideals, intimidate enemies, and preserve legacies. A pharaoh's statue wasn't just a likeness, it was a declaration of divine right. A Greek hero's poised stance wasn't just about beauty, it was a lesson in courage and virtue. Every fold of drapery, every tensed muscle, every serene expression was a language unto itself. So today, we're going to step into the minds of these master sculptors, decoding the hidden messages they left behind. By the time we're done, you'll never look at these ancient wonders the same way again, because once you understand their secrets, they won't just be statues. They'll be storytellers whispering across the centuries. Long before alphabets or written languages existed, sculptures became humanity's first global dialect, a silent conversation carved in stone. Picture an Assyrian guardian lion with its bulging muscles and bared teeth, standing watch at a palace gate. Now, jump across the world to a Mayan stela, where a ruler's elongated forehead and ornate headdress scream divine authority. Though these cultures never met, they spoke the same visual language: exaggeration equals power. A curled lip wasn't just a facial feature, it was a threat. A downward gaze wasn't mere modesty, it was sacred contemplation. Take the Buddha's iconic smile, barely there, yet unmistakably peaceful. Artists across Asia perfected this subtle curve to represent nirvana, proving that less could say more. Contrast that with the roaring expressions of Greek gorgons, their serpent hair writhing in frozen terror. Both styles aim to trigger visceral reactions, just as a clenched fist or outstretched palm still does today. Even the materials whispered meaning. Egyptian pharaohs gleamed in gold to mirror the sun god's immortality, while Aztec jaguar warriors wore obsidian for its lethal sheen. What's truly astonishing is how these symbols bypass translation. A mother grieving in ancient Ur and a father mourning in Han Dynasty China would both recognize the slump of shoulders in a funerary statue. Victory wasn't just written, it was shown through raised chins and spread arms, whether on a Roman triumphal arch or a Khmer temple wall. These artists didn't need words to tell us about pride, fear, or transcendence. They let the angle of a brow or the tension in a wrist do the talking. And somehow, millennia later, we still understand every word. Ancient sculptors treated stone not as a lifeless block, but as a sleeping giant waiting to awaken under their tools. Those deep undercuts you see in Greek statues, the way a robe dips behind a knee or curls around an elbow, weren't just artistic flair. They were optical tricks, using shadows to create the illusion that the next breeze might make that marble drapery ripple. And it worked so well that visitors to the Parthenon once swore they saw Athena's peplos flutter in the wind. But the magic wasn't just in the carving, it was in the material itself. Take the Venus de Milo's luminous surface, polished with abrasives finer than modern sandpaper until it seemed to glow from within. That wasn't vanity, it was alchemy. By mimicking human skin's subtle translucency, sculptors tricked our brains into seeing warmth in cold stone. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, Egyptian artists took the opposite approach. Their granite statues of pharaohs were left deliberately rough, the stone's unyielding hardness mirroring the ruler's eternal authority. The choice between marble and bronze was like picking a language. When the Greeks cast a warrior in bronze, the metal's tensile strength let them push boundaries, extending a sword arm boldly into space without fear of snapping. That defiance of gravity became a metaphor for human potential, but marble, it spoke in whispers. The way light seeped into its crystalline structure gave saints and goddesses an otherworldly aura, as if the stone itself was straining toward the divine. Even flaws became tools. Hellenistic sculptors loved using veins in marble to trace the path of a straining tendon or the delicate blue beneath a wrist skin. And that famous wet drapery effect where cloth appears glued to the body by invisible water wasn't just about showing off technical skill. On funerary statues, those clinging folds symbolized the soul's release from earthly burdens, the fabric becoming as weightless as the spirit it shrouded. What's astonishing is how these techniques crossed cultures without a single shared textbook. Mayan sculptors used jade's oily sheen to make ceremonial masks seem to sweat with supernatural energy, while Chinese artisans carved jade cicadas so thin, mourners could see light through their wings, a promise that death wasn't an end but a metamorphosis. From Rome to Cambodia, artists discovered the same truth. Stone only stays dead if you carve it without understanding its secrets. They say the eyes are the windows to the soul, but for ancient sculptors, they were something even more powerful, a way to bridge the gap between the mortal and the divine. Walk up to an Egyptian statue and you might feel an uncanny sensation, as if those stone eyes are tracking your every move. That's because they were designed to. Craftsmen hollowed out the pupils and filled them with polished quartz or obsidian, so when sunlight hit them just right, the gemstones would gleam with an unsettling, lifelike intensity. It wasn't just artistry, it was psychological warfare. A pharaoh's statue wasn't meant to be admired, it was meant to be feared, its gaze piercing through time as sharply as it did in life. Now step into ancient Greece, where sculptors took a completely different approach. The famous Korai statues, those serene maidens standing guard at temples, had eyes painted in vivid blues and greens, their irises so detailed you'd swear they blinked. Unlike Egypt's gemstone stare, these eyes felt warm, almost conversational. That was the point. Greeks wanted their statues to feel present, as if they might step off their pedestals and join the living. But here's the twist. Over centuries, the paint faded, leaving behind blank, ghostly marbles that later cultures mistook as intentional. The Renaissance even copied this empty look, not realizing they were preserving an accident of time. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, rulers went for something far more unsettling. Their statues often had wide, unseeing eyes, no pupils, no irises, just smooth, almond-shaped voids. This wasn't a lack of skill, it was a statement. Those blank eyes symbolized a connection to the divine, as if the figure was looking beyond our world into realms mortals couldn't comprehend. It forced viewers to confront something alien, something greater than themselves. And then there were the Romans, who perfected the art of the authoritarian glare. Emperors like Augustus had portraits carved with hyper-realistic eyes, their pupils slightly downturned, not enough to seem weak, but just enough to make you feel like they were judging you from above. It was a masterclass in silent dominance. Even today, when you lock eyes with a Roman bust in a museum, you're not just seeing a face, you're facing down centuries of calculated intimidation. The most fascinating thing, across all these cultures, the eyes were never just about sight. They were about control. Whether it was the hypnotic shimmer of Egyptian gems, the inviting warmth of Greek paint, or the chilling void of Mesopotamian stone, sculptors knew one universal truth: if you could hold someone's gaze, you could hold their mind. And thousands of years later, their stone eyes still do. A single outstretched finger could change history. In ancient art, every gesture was a carefully chosen word in a silent language of power, one that kings and gods used to command entire civilizations. Take the Mesopotamian supplicant pose, where figures clasped their hands beneath their chin like a prayer frozen in time. This wasn't just humility, it was theater. By showing rulers or deities receiving this pose, artists broadcasted a clear message: bow, and you might be spared. Now, flip the script to Rome, where emperors mastered the adlocutio, one arm extended, palm open, as if freezing a crowd mid-cheer. That gesture didn't just say listen, it screamed obey without a single shout, but hands could also heal. Across India, Buddha's mudras turned fingers into sacred semaphore. His Abhaya Mudra, right hand raised, palm outward, wasn't just a greeting. It was a promise of protection, a visual shield against fear. Meanwhile, the Dhyana Mudra, with hands stacked in the lap, whispered of deep meditation, inviting followers to mirror that stillness. And here's the genius: these gestures crossed language barriers. A farmer who'd never read a scripture could understand Buddha's Varada Mudra, palm open, fingers pointing earthward, as clearly as we understand a helping hand today. It meant I give. Even the absence of movement spoke volumes. Egyptian pharaohs often sat rigid, hands flat on their knees, a pose so unchanging it screamed immortality. Their fingers didn't flex, their wrists didn't bend. They were mountains, not men. Contrast that with the dynamic twists of Greek statues, where a hero's reaching hand might pull your gaze toward an invisible foe. And let's not forget the subtle power of a tilted head. In Assyrian art, a ruler's slight downward glance wasn't meekness. It was calculated dominance, forcing subjects to crane upward just to meet his eyes. The most fascinating part: these gestures still work today. Modern politicians unconsciously borrow the adlocutio in speeches, and raised palms still signal peace. When a judge lifts a hand to swear in a witness, they're channeling the same silent authority as a Mesopotamian priest blessing a harvest. That's the real magic. These sculpted gestures weren't just art. They were humanity's first emojis, carved in stone and meant to last forever. And against all odds, they do. Standing at the base of a 60-foot-tall statue of Ramses II, craning your neck just to glimpse the pharaoh's stone sandals, you didn't just see a king, you felt small. That was the whole point. Ancient rulers understood something psychologists now confirm. Scale isn't just about measurement, it's about emotion. When Ramses' sculptors carved his seated colossus at Abu Simbel, they weren't showing off technical skill, they were engineering reverence. The statue's exaggerated proportions, with hands thicker than a man's torso and eyes wider than shields, transformed admiration into something closer to fear. And it worked. Even today, when sunlight creeps into the temple at dawn, illuminating that gargantuan face, modern visitors report the same instinctive urge to bow. But size wasn't just for intimidation. The Greeks played a brilliant double game with scale. In the Parthenon, Athena Parthenos towered over worshippers at nearly 40 feet tall, her gold and ivory skin shimmering like a living goddess. Yet just outside, the temple's frieze featured mortals carved at eye level, inviting viewers to see themselves in the story. This wasn't an accident. By alternating between colossal deities and approachable humans, Greek artists created a visual dialogue. The gods were awe-inspiring, but the people, they belonged in the narrative. Now shift to Easter Island, where the Moai's sheer mass served a darker purpose. These basalt giants weren't just memorials, they were territorial markers. With their backs to the sea and faces glaring inland, their oversized heads and elongated features weren't artistic choices. They were billboards, carved to be visible from miles away. Their exaggerated brows and jutting chins broadcasted a simple message: this land is watched. And it worked without a single word. Even today, their hollow eyes seem to track your movements, a silent warning echoing across 800 years. Yet for every towering colossus, there were dozens of palm-sized votives, tiny terracotta figurines like the Tanagra ladies of Greece. These weren't meant to overwhelm. They were designed to nestle in the hand, their delicate drapery and playful poses whispering secrets of daily life. A woman adjusting her hat, a dancer mid-twirl. These weren't gods or rulers, but moments frozen in intimacy. That's the genius of ancient scale. It knew when to shout and when to murmur. A pharaoh's statue roared with dominance, but a mourning mother's votive statue, small enough to clutch to the chest, that was art's first lullaby, the real power play. Combining both, look at Assyrian palace reliefs where kings loom 3 times larger than their servants, not because they were giants, but because hierarchy demanded visual shorthand. Or consider the Buddha statues of Sri Lanka, where a massive seated figure might be flanked by human-sized attendants, creating a gradient of sacredness. Even the materials conspired in this illusion. Marble's natural veins could make a colossal statue seem to breathe, while bronze's reflective surface made smaller figures glow like apparitions. What's haunting is how these tricks still work. Modern architects use soaring ceilings to humble visitors in courthouses, while jewelry designers craft lockets meant to be held close. The language of scale hasn't changed, we've just forgotten we're speaking it. So next time you feel dwarfed by a skyscraper or comforted by a locket's weight, remember, you're not just reacting to size. You're feeling exactly what an ancient sculptor intended. Drapery in ancient sculpture wasn't just cloth, it was a secret language of movement and meaning, frozen in stone. Take Nike of Samothrace, her chiton whipped into chaotic waves as if the wind itself celebrated her victory. Every fold wasn't just decoration, it was physics in action, carving the invisible force of her speed into something you could almost hear. Now contrast that with the rigid symmetry of a Byzantine emperor's robes, each pleat as precise as a military formation. That wasn't fabric, it was armor woven from symbolism, weighty with the message, I do not move. The world moves around me, but sometimes the most powerful statement was stripping drapery away entirely. Greek athletes stood naked not for vanity, but as a manifesto, muscles exposed like a map of perfection, proving the human body was worth celebrating without shame. Yet even here, sculptors played tricks. Look at the Dorophoros, his balanced stance so natural, you'd swear his marble skin might twitch. That was the genius. Nudity wasn't vulnerability, it was truth carved raw. Meanwhile, Roman emperors took the opposite approach. When Augustus draped himself like a statesman, his toga's calculated folds whispered civilization, while his bare feet hinted at divine connection, a wardrobe of stone that said both mortal and god in one breath. The real magic, how drapery could bend time. Hellenistic sculptors mastered the wet look, where cloth clung to bodies as if soaked by an unseen storm. On funerary statues, those translucent folds symbolized the soul slipping free of earthly weight. But in Indian temple art, swirling scarves and fluttering sashes turned gods into whirlwinds of motion, their garments frozen mid-dance for eternity. And don't forget the Egyptians, who turned linen into geometry, crisp, flat pleats that made pharaohs seem cut from the fabric of the cosmos itself. Fabric even became a weapon. When Medusa's serpent hair tangled with her twisting robes, the chaos screamed terror. But the Virgin Mary's smooth mantle in medieval art, that was a visual hug, its soft curves promising shelter. From the delicate ripple of a Greek peplos to the stiff gold threads of a Chinese emperor's robe, every thread told a story. So next time you see a statue's drapery, don't just look, listen. That stone isn't silent. It's whispering secrets about power, movement, and the art of making rock breathe. Facial expressions in ancient sculpture weren't just details. They were revolutions carved in stone. Take the archaic Greek kouroi, those enigmatic young men frozen with their signature smile. It wasn't a grin of joy, but a technical breakthrough, the first attempt to animate stone with human emotion. Their lips curl slightly upward, not to convey happiness, but to break the rigidity of the block, suggesting life beneath the surface. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find the Laocoon group, where every muscle in the priest's face strains in agony, his brows knitted in terror as sea serpents coil around him. That's the leap from symbolism to storytelling, where a furrowed brow could make you feel the bite of the snake. Roman portraiture took realism to another level entirely. Forget flattery, these artists carved wisdom in wrinkles, power in receding hairlines, and authority in jowls. A bust of Julius Caesar isn't just a face, it's a map of campaigns and betrayals, with crow's feet that speak of sleepless nights and a mouth set in weary determination. Verism wasn't about beauty, it was about authenticity. A senator's bust might showcase a hooked nose or sagging cheeks, because in Rome, imperfections were badges of experience. Walk into a patrician's villa, and those lined faces lining the walls weren't just ancestors, they were lessons in survival. Yet the Greeks had a different philosophy. Hellenistic sculptors mastered the art of idealized emotion, faces balanced between beauty and raw feeling. The famous Gaul killing himself and his wife doesn't just show pain, it layers it. The warrior's clenched jaw and downturned lips mix defiance with despair, while his wife's limp body and half-closed eyes whisper resignation. It's not just a scene, it's a psychological duel. Even in quieter moments, like the sleeping Ariadne with her parted lips and relaxed eyelids, the artistry lies in what's unsaid. You don't just see her slumber, you feel the weight of her dreams. Compare this to the serene detachment of Buddhist sculptures, where the Buddha's closed eyes and faint smile suggest a mind untroubled by earthly chaos. The slight asymmetry in his expression, lips softer on one side, wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated choice to avoid the lifelessness of perfect symmetry, a trick later echoed in Renaissance art. Meanwhile, in Egypt, pharaohs wore masks of calm, their features smoothed into eternal neutrality, not because they lacked emotion, but because their power transcended it. A god-king's face wasn't meant to frown or smile. It was a mirror of the unshakable cosmos. The most fascinating twist, some expressions were never meant to be seen. Aztec skull racks, Ortiz Ampantli, featured carved faces contorted in silent screams, a warning to enemies, their open mouths and widened eyes forever frozen in stone. Yet in the same culture, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl wore a mask of tranquil benevolence, his curved lips promising creation, not destruction. Even the materials conspired in this theater of emotion. The Greeks used Parian marble's translucency to give cheeks a lifelike blush, while obsidian's glassy sheen made Olmec statues' eyes gleam with otherworldly intensity. What's astonishing is how these ancient artists hacked the human brain. A slight tilt of the head could make a statue seem to follow you across the room. A barely raised eyebrow could whisper doubt or command attention. From the haunting sorrow of Michelangelo's Piet, inspired by these very techniques, to the determined set of a modern soldier's memorial, the language of facial expression hasn't changed. We still read stone faces as if they might blink, because those ancient sculptors didn't just carve rock, they carved the universal code of what it means to feel. A pharaoh's crown wasn't just headwear, it was a battery of divine energy. The striped Nemes headdress with its bold blue and gold bands didn't just frame a ruler's face, it mirrored the rays of the sun god Ra, transforming the wearer into a living beacon of celestial power. Tilt your head and you'll notice the Urius serpent coiled at its brow, ready to spit venom at any challenger. This was more than decoration. It was a wearable throne, every fold and symbol whispering, "I am not just a king, I am the horizon where earth meets sky." Now shift to Greece, where Athena's Corinthian helmet sat pushed back on her head, revealing her face while keeping the cheek guards flared. This wasn't a fashion choice, it was a billboard of intelligence. By showing her features, artists emphasized wisdom, but the helmet's presence screamed, "I can arm myself in an instant." Compare that to the crested helmets of Spartan warriors. Their horsehair plumes dyed crimson not for visibility, but to mimic the unshakable bristles of a boar in battle. Even the angle of a plume mattered. Tilted forward, it signaled aggression. Swept back, it hinted at vigilance. Jewelry, too, was a language. The broad collar of Isis, with its rows of lotus and falcon motifs, wasn't just glamorous, it was a wearable prayer. Each bead represented a layer of divine protection, the way a modern soldier's medals telegraph valor without a word. In West Africa, the Benin Kingdom's leopard-tooth necklaces didn't just signify royalty, they promised the wearer carried the beast's ferocity in their bones. And let's not forget the Maori high tiki pendants, their inlaid eyes and tilted heads encoding generations of ancestry in jade. Even hairstyles held power. The intricate braids of a Roman Vestal Virgin, woven by 6 priestesses, were as sacred as the temple walls. A single loose curl could mean exile. Meanwhile, in Japan, the shaved pates and topknots of samurai broadcasted loyalty, their hair literally held in place by cords tied to their lord's crest. And in Mesoamerica, the Maya elite elongated their skulls in infancy, binding them to create a forehead as sloping as a maize god's. This wasn't vanity, it was a living crown, proof that their very flesh had been sculpted by the gods. The genius of these accessories, they worked like QR codes, instant visual triggers anyone in that culture could scan. A Viking's arm ring wasn't just gold, it was a contract worn on the body, its weight equal to the oath it represented. The flared hem of a Chinese emperor's dragon robe didn't just swirl dramatically, its 9 clawed serpents marked him as the axis of the cosmos. Even something as simple as a scepter held secrets. The crook and flail of Egyptian pharaohs weren't just tools, their curves mirrored the Nile's bends and the wheat's yield, binding the ruler to the land's fertility. What's startling is how these symbols still resonate. A judge's gavel, a general's epaulets, a pope's mitre, they're all descendants of this ancient visual shorthand. So next time you see a crown in a museum, don't just admire its gems, read it, because that's not a piece of history, it's a whole manifesto hammered into gold. Imagine walking into the Parthenon in 480 BC, not to the cold white marbles we know today, but to a riot of color. Athena's peplos dyed saffron yellow, her shield emblazoned with cobalt blue serpents, her skin gilded with actual gold leaf. This wasn't just decoration, it was a full sensory assault. Greek statues didn't whisper, they shouted in vermilion and azure, their pigments mixed from crushed minerals, plants, even precious stones. A warrior's cloak might be stained with murex shell purple, a dye so expensive it was worth its weight in silver. And those eyes, they weren't blank voids. Artists painted irises in shimmering malachite green, with lashes defined by delicate strokes of charcoal. The effect was so lifelike, ancient writers described statues seeming to sweat or blush. Now, cross the Mediterranean to Egypt, where color wasn't art, it was magic. A pharaoh's skin, painted in strict red ochre, wasn't just a stylistic choice. It tied them to the scorching power of the desert sun god Ra. Meanwhile, goddesses like Hathor gleamed in golden yellow, their flesh literally mirroring the celestial metal that never tarnished. Even the underworld had its palette. Osiris's green skin signaled resurrection, echoing the Nile's life-giving floods, but the real mastery was in the details. Kohl-rimmed eyes weren't about beauty, they were spiritual armor. The dark lines repelled evil spirits, just as they shielded living eyes from the sun's glare. And that iconic blue wig on Queen Nefertiti's bust, it wasn't just a fashion statement. Lapis lazuli blue was the color of the heavens, a way to wear the cosmos on your head. The Chinese took polychromy to another level entirely. Terracotta warriors weren't just clay, they were individual canvases, each one painted with unique facial tones, armor lacquered in vibrant reds and purples derived from cinnabar and manganese. Their pigments were so advanced, some retained their brilliance for centuries underground. But the most haunting use of color, the Maya's Maya blue, a turquoise so resilient it survives in pyramids despite centuries of jungle humidity. Scientists still debate its recipe, but its symbolism is clear. The color of sacrifice, of sacred water, of the threshold between life and death. What's heartbreaking is how much we've lost. Time, weather, and even well-meaning archaeologists scrubbed away traces of these palettes, leaving us with the myth of monochrome antiquity. But new technologies are rewriting history. Ultraviolet light reveals ghostly traces of paint on Greek marbles, the faint blush on a knee, the shadow of a patterned hem. And in Egypt, multispectral imaging has uncovered tattoos on mummies, proving skin itself was a sculptural canvas. The takeaway: ancient sculptures didn't just represent life, they competed with it. When a Roman general's statue wore a crimson cloak, it wasn't fabric carved in stone, it was wool dyed in stone. And that's the real shock. These colors weren't realistic, they were hyperreal. A god's skin might be painted an impossible gold, not to mimic flesh but to transcend it. So next time you see a white marble, remember, you're not seeing austerity, you're seeing a ghost, and with every new technological breakthrough, we're giving those ghosts back their voices one pigment at a time. A statue's power wasn't just in its carving, it was in where it stood. Take Egypt's Temple of Karnak, where colossal statues of pharaohs line the processional way, each one positioned precisely so the rising sun would ignite their quartz-inlaid eyes at dawn. That wasn't just spectacle, it was celestial choreography, turning stone into a mirror of the gods' daily rebirth. These figures didn't just face worshippers, they loomed over them, forcing visitors to crane their necks upward, physically enacting submission with every step. The message was unmistakable: you are small and the divine is vast. Now shift to a dimly lit Mycenaean tomb where funerary sculptures crouched in corners, their blank eyes fixed not on the living but on the underworld's threshold. Their placement was no accident. Carved into niches where torchlight flickered unpredictably, their expressions seemed to shift, serene one moment, stern the next. This was psychological theater, using shadow and angle to make the dead feel unnervingly present. Even the materials conspired in the illusion. A statue near a tomb's entrance might be rough-hewn limestone, while deeper inside, polished marble figures glowed like apparitions, guiding souls toward eternity. The Greeks took this further with the Parthenon's pediment sculptures. Carved in high relief, these gods and heroes weren't meant to be viewed straight on. Their torsos twisted, their limbs stretched, all calibrated for visibility from 40 feet below. Athena's birth scene, with her body emerging at a dramatic diagonal, would have seemed to defy gravity to an Athenian standing in the temple's shadow. And here's the genius. The figure's proportions were subtly distorted, head slightly larger, drapery folds deeper, to compensate for the viewer's steep upward gaze. What looked unbalanced at close range became perfectly lifelike from the ground. Roman emperors weaponized placement even more ruthlessly. A triumphal arch's sculptures weren't just art, they were propaganda at eye level. Captured enemies, carved in defeated postures, lined the lower friezes where crowds would literally walk over them. Meanwhile, the emperor's face, mounted high above, would catch the sun at noon, timed to dazzle spectators during public ceremonies. This wasn't decoration, it was domination by design. The most haunting examples come from Mesoamerica. At Teotihuacan, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent didn't just display carvings, it hid them. Serpent heads emerged from shadowed recesses only when sunlight hit at the equinox, slithering into view as if summoned by the sun itself. And at Chichen Itza, the Mayan pyramid staircase transformed during solstices, the play of light and shadow creating the illusion of a diamond-backed serpent slithering down to earth. What's revelatory is how these techniques still shape our spaces today. From the Lincoln memorials upward gaze to the calculated sightlines of war memorials, we're still using ancient tricks to stir awe. So next time a statue gives you chills, look beyond the carving. The real magic might be in where it stands and where it makes you stand. The moment you lock eyes with a sphinx, you're not just facing a statue, you're confronting a riddle carved in stone. Why blend human and beast? Because hybrid creatures weren't just myths, they were masterclasses in psychological power. Take the Egyptian Sphinx, its lion's body coiled with predatory patience beneath a pharaoh's face. This wasn't fantasy, it was a calculated equation. Human intellect plus animal strength equals unstoppable authority. And it worked. When enemies saw those massive paws and piercing royal gaze, they weren't just seeing a monster. They were seeing the state itself, a force as natural and merciless as the desert sun. Now zoom in on Assyria's Lamashu, those winged bulls with human heads guarding palace gates. Their 5 legs weren't a sculptor's mistake. They were a stroke of genius. Walk past one, and from the front, it appeared planted like a sentinel, but from the side. Those extra limbs created the illusion of movement, as if the creature had just stepped forward to block your path, and those intricately curled beards. Each ring was a cipher, echoing the sacred hairstyle of gods. This wasn't decoration, it was a border checkpoint where the divine met the mortal. The Greeks took hybrids in a wilder direction. Centaurs weren't just horsemen, they were walking contradictions. Their equine halves symbolized untamed nature, while their human torsos clutched weapons or wine cups, embodying civilization's dual edges. A centaur charging with a boulder overhead wasn't merely attacking. It was demonstrating how easily raw power could shatter order. Contrast that with the Gorgons, whose serpent hair wasn't just terrifying, it was a visual pun. Just as Medusa's gaze turned men to stone, her hair writhed with creatures whose venom could paralyze. The message: some hybrids weren't meant to uplift, they existed to warn. But no culture weaponized hybrids like the Egyptians. Horus's falcon head didn't just signify the sky, it was a living hieroglyph. Those sharp eyes saw all, just as a king surveilled his realm. Anubis's jackal muzzle, it sniffed out deceit while guarding the threshold between worlds. Even benign hybrids like Tawaret, part hippo, part lion, part crocodile, packed meaning. Her swollen belly protected childbirth, proving that terror and tenderness could share one body. The brilliance of these creatures, they bypassed logic. You didn't need to understand imperial policy to grasp a Lamashu's message. Its sheer unnaturalness short-circuited reasoning, triggering primal awe. That's why hybrids persist today, from corporate logos to superhero origin stories. When you need to signal that something defies ordinary limits, you still reach for the oldest trick in the book: stitch two beings together and let the impossible take shape. The Discobolus, frozen mid-throw with every muscle coiled like a spring, doesn't just show motion, it makes you feel the thwack of the discus leaving his fingers. That twist in his torso, the way his toes grip an invisible ground, even the slight imbalance as he leans into the throw. It's all a masterclass in turning stone into kinetic energy. Greek sculptors didn't just carve athletes, they carved split seconds, bottling the tension right before release. And here's the genius: that imbalance isn't a flaw. It's an invitation. Your brain sees that precarious tilt and instinctively leans the other way, as if to catch him. That's how you know the trick worked. You don't just see movement. You anticipate it. Now, step into an Egyptian tomb. Those rigid cast statues, feet fused together and arms locked at their sides, aren't failures of artistry, they're declarations of defiance. Time doesn't erode them, gravity doesn't sway them. Their stillness isn't empty, it's full of the promise that some things, like a pharaoh's soul, are meant to outlast the chaos of the world. Every squared-off shoulder and forward stare whispers, "I am not here to move, I am here to endure." The contrast couldn't be starker. Greek statues borrow from life, their marble seemingly paused between breaths. But Egyptian cast statues refuse life, their granite bodies rejecting mortal weaknesses like fatigue or hesitation. One culture worshipped the beauty of the fleeting moment, the other carved monuments to the eternal now. Yet both understood the same truth: pose is propaganda. When a Roman emperor chose to be sculpted in the contrapposto stance, one knee bent, weight shifted, he wasn't just showing off his sculptor's skill. He was aligning himself with Greek ideals of dynamism and democracy. But when an Assyrian king stood stiffly, his beard perfectly coiled and cloak unnaturally stiff, he broadcasted absolute control over his body, his people, even the stone itself. The real surprise: sometimes stillness screams louder than motion. Look at the Buddha's meditation pose, feet folded, hands resting, not a single muscle tensed. That calm isn't passive, it's a visual roar about inner power. Or consider the terrifying immobility of Aztec warrior statues, their feet rooted as if grown from the earth, their faces locked in battle focus. No motion needed, their stability is the threat. And then there are the trickster statues that cheat both categories. The dancing faun from Pompeii captures mid-spin, his drapery whirling, yet his planted foot suggests he could hold this pose forever. The Chola bronzes of India go further, their deities' multiple arms frozen in dance, each hand holding a different symbol. They're not just moving, they're performing every movement at once: destruction and creation, blessing and warning, all in one breathless instant. What's haunting is how these choices still shape our world. Modern athlete statues echo the Discobolus, forever caught in iconic moves. Memorials lean toward Egyptian stillness, their figures solemn and unchanging. Even in animation, the principles hold: a paused frame can feel heavier than a flurry of motion. Ancient sculptors knew something we're still rediscovering: the body doesn't just do. It speaks, and whether it's the whisper of a nearly lifted heel or the thunder of a spine that will never bend, every pose is a sentence in a language we've been fluent in for millennia. There's a raw, unsettling power in the way ancient sculptors carved defeat, not as an afterthought, but as a deliberate chorus to victory's roar. Take the Assyrian palace reliefs at Nineveh, where bound captives slump beneath their conquerors' feet. These aren't generic prisoners, they're individuals. You can see the strain in their arched backs, the way their fingers claw at invisible ropes. One figure's beard is matted with sweat, another's lips part mid-plea. This wasn't just propaganda, it was psychological warfare in stone. By humanizing the defeated, Assyrian artists made their fate inescapably real to viewers. The message, resistance is futile, and this could be you. Now contrast that with the heartbreaking intimacy of the dying Galatian, a Roman copy of a Greek original. This fallen warrior doesn't glare in defiance or beg for mercy. He's past that. His head bows under the weight of his own mortality, one hand still gripping his wound as if trying to hold his life inside. The genius is in what's missing. No triumphant enemy stands over him. His defeat is solitary, almost sacred. Here, the sculptor didn't want you to fear conquest, they wanted you to feel it. The Gaul's furrowed brow and slack lips don't scream pain, they whisper exhaustion, the kind that comes when the fight is truly over. Egypt took a third approach. When pharaohs depicted their foes, they often carved them upside down or bound into the bases of footstools. But in a twist, these enemies were rarely personalized. They were symbols, not people. Generic Nubians or Hittites whose humiliation reinforced cosmic order. Step on them, and you weren't just crushing rebels, you were stomping chaos itself. Yet even here, exceptions emerge. A rare relief in Luxor shows Canaanite prisoners with distinct facial features, some bearded, others clean-shaven, their eyes wide with a terror so specific it transcends time. The Maya weaponized empathy even more cleverly. At Tonana, a captured rival king is sculpted kneeling, but his elaborate headdress remains intact. This wasn't mercy, it was magnified humiliation. By showing his regalia untouched, the victors shouted, "We didn't just beat a man, we toppled a god." Meanwhile, in China, Qin dynasty terracotta warriors included figures of kneeling archers, not enemies, but surrendered soldiers absorbed into the emperor's army. Their downcast eyes and relaxed shoulders tell a story of reluctant loyalty, proving defeat could be a beginning, not just an end. The most haunting examples come from Rome's Trajan's Column, where Dacian women clutch their children while Roman soldiers torch their villages. One mother's draped arm mirrors the Piet, a pose centuries before Michelangelo, an intentional echo that forced Roman viewers to confront the human cost of their empire's glory. And that's the paradox. These sculptures of the defeated weren't just about shame. They were mirrors reflecting back whatever emotion the victor or the viewer needed to see, warning, pity, or even quiet respect. A fist raised in triumph means nothing without a body beneath it, and sometimes it's the slumped shoulders of the conquered that carry history's weight. Light and shadow weren't just tools for ancient sculptors, they were collaborators. Walk into a dimly lit chamber of an Egyptian temple, and suddenly, the statue of a god isn't just stone, it's alive. Torchlight flickers across polished obsidian eyes, making them gleam with an eerie intelligence. The play of shadows deepens the curve of a smile or hardens the set of a jaw, transforming stillness into a performance. This wasn't accidental. Artists meticulously positioned statues to catch light at specific angles, knowing a single beam could turn a carved face from benevolent to wrathful in an instant. The Great Sphinx, for example, wasn't just placed facing east for grandeur, it was timed. At dawn, the rising sun would strike its face first, igniting the limestone with a golden glow that made the pharaoh's likeness seem to awaken with the day itself. Now fast forward to the Hellenistic era, where sculptors treated shadows like a sculptor's chisel. The Laocoon group's twisting figures aren't just carved, they're lit. Deep undercuts between serpent coils and strained muscles create pockets of darkness so intense, they amplify the agony in every limb. It's Baroque drama centuries before Baroque existed. The more light floods the scene, the more those shadows writhe, pulling viewers into the priest's suffocating struggle. Even the Nike of Samothrace owes part of her kinetic energy to shadow play. The recesses beneath her wind-whipped robes aren't just realistic folds, they're shadow traps, designed to deepen when light rakes across them, making the stone seem to flutter mid-flight. But the real masters of light manipulation were the Egyptians. Their statues weren't just placed in temples, they were orchestrated. A quartz inlaid eye, polished to a mirror finish, would catch the barest glint of a priest's oil lamp, creating the illusion of a blink. Gold leaf applied to a god's skin reflected torchlight in a way that made the figure seem to radiate warmth. And in the Karnak's hypostyle hall, colossal pillars were spaced so precisely that at midday, sunlight would slice between them like blades, illuminating only the pharaoh's statues, leaving rivals and enemies in literal darkness. The Aztecs pulled a similar trick with their Tezcatl mirrors. Embedded in statues' chests or headdresses, these obsidian discs didn't just shine, they moved. As worshippers circled the figure, their reflections would distort in the mirror's surface, making the god appear to watch them from every angle. It was immersive theater, using light to erase the line between idol and audience. What's astonishing is how these techniques still work today. Stand in front of Michelangelo's Moses under the shifting light of a Roman church, and you'll see veins pulse in his marble hands as shadows creep across them. Or watch a Buddha statue in a Kyoto temple at dusk, its gilded cheeks holding the last sunlight long after the room has darkened, as if the divine lingers longer in the light. These artists didn't just carve stone, they carved time, bending sunlight and candle glow into their narratives. So next time you see a statue's expression shift with the hour, remember, you're not just seeing art. You're seeing a conversation between the sculptor and the sun, one that's been going on for millennia. A missing nose on an ancient statue isn't just damage, it's a calculated erasure of identity. In Egypt, where breath was linked to the soul's survival, chiseling off a pharaoh's nostrils didn't just deface stone, it suffocated their legacy, but sometimes the voids were more subtle. Take the Venus de Milo's absent arms, her empty shoulders aren't just a mystery, they're an invitation. Without tools or attributes to label her, she became a blank canvas for every era's ideals. A goddess to the Romantics, a mother to the Victorians, a muse to modern artists. Silence, it turns out, can be the loudest statement of all. Deliberate destruction often carried the weight of a verdict. When Byzantine Christians toppled pagan statues, they didn't just smash faces, they targeted hands. A Zeus without his thunderbolt was no longer a threat. An Athena missing her spear couldn't defend her city. Even the elements conspired in this symbolism. Acid rain slowly dissolved the smiles of Gothic cathedral saints, leaving them eerily serene, a twist of fate that made their weathered faces feel more eternal, not less. And in Cambodia, the Khmer Rouge hacked at Angkor Wat's apsaras not randomly, but precisely, breaking fingers that once gestured sacred mudras, silencing their stone prayers forever. Yet some absences were built in. The hollow eyes of Easter Island's moai weren't oversights, they were sockets meant to hold coral and obsidian pupils during rituals, transforming blank faces into watchful ancestors. Similarly, the empty hands of Greek kouroi weren't unfinished. They awaited bronze offerings, a sword, a cup that would define their purpose. When these perishable items vanished, the statues became paradoxes, both incomplete and perfectly whole. The most haunting gaps, those left by time itself. A Roman emperor's shattered jaw might make his famous speeches feel suddenly fragile. A Buddha's crumbling lap, where devotees once placed flowers, turns devotion into dust. But here's the twist: these wounds often deepen the art. The weathered folds of a medieval saint's robe, worn smooth by centuries of touching hands, don't just show damage, they show love, polished into the stone by generations of the faithful. What's extraordinary is how these fragments still speak. The broken edge of a Sumerian king's beard might hint at a rival's vengeance, while a Renaissance statue's missing apple, once gilded and clutched in its hand, whispers of looted treasures. Even archaeology's blanks tell stories. The empty plinth where a colonial power's monument once stood isn't just absence, it's a reckoning, carved in negative space. So next time you see a statue with a missing piece, don't just mourn what's gone. Listen. Sometimes the silence between the cracks holds the truest echo of history. Male figures in ancient sculpture didn't just stand, they lunged, conquered, and commanded. From the taut muscles of a Greek discus thrower to the armored stride of a Roman emperor, their poses screamed agency, every sinew carved to embody the era's ideal of virility. But female statues, they were often anchors of symbolism, graceful caryatids holding up temples, serene goddesses with hips curved like amphorae, or modest mourners with veiled heads. These weren't just artistic choices, they were stone textbooks teaching societal roles. A woman's statue might cradle a child or clutch a sheaf of wheat, her body a monument to fertility and nurture. Even her draped robes spoke volumes, their folds carefully arranged to suggest modesty, as if the fabric itself was a moral code carved in marble. Then there were the rule breakers. The Amazons of Greek art, muscular, breast-bearing, and mid-battle, were sculpted with the same dynamic energy as their male adversaries. Look closely at the Amazonamaki friezes, and you'll see a shocking equality of violence. Women warriors yanking heroes' hair, their faces twisted in the same grit as the men they fought. These weren't fantasies, they were provocations. By showing women as combatants, artists hinted at a world where gender didn't dictate destiny, the most subversive detail. Many Amazon statues bore wounds in their left breasts, a nod to real female archers who allegedly removed their right breasts to draw bows more easily, proof that even myth had roots in reality. Egypt offered its own exceptions. Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh, was carved with the traditional false beard and kilt of kingship, her body merging masculine power with the delicate curves of her face. But here's the twist: later rulers tried to erase her, literally hacking away her images to rewrite history. The message was clear: a woman could rule, but only if she wore the costume of a man. Meanwhile, in West Africa, the Benin Kingdom's Queen Mother busts radiated authority without compromise. Their coiled neck rings and towering headdresses weren't just regalia. They were visual coronations, proving motherhood could be as formidable as any battlefield. Even materials conspired in this gendered language. Greek Korai statues were often painted in soft pinks and blues, their pigments as delicate as the ideals they represented. But the bronze Amazons, they gleamed like weapons, their metal surfaces catching light like drawn swords. And in India, the goddess Kali's statues took rebellion further. Her tongue lolled in defiance, her necklace of skulls mocking decorum. She wasn't just female power, she was power unleashed, a reminder that stone could scream as loudly as it could whisper. The quietest revolution, though, might be in the overlooked statues of everyday women. A Roman baker's memorial shows her elbow deep in dough, her strong arms challenging the notion that labor was masculine. a Tang Dynasty courtesan statue captures her mid-dance, her swaying hips and raised sleeves celebrating skill, not just beauty. These weren't deities or rebels, just women immortalized in the acts of living, their ordinary moments made eternal. And that, perhaps, is the most radical statement of all, that a woman's value could be carved in something other than motherhood or myth. What's haunting is how these ancient debates still echo. Modern monuments to female leaders often wrestle with the same questions. Should they be gentle or fierce, maternal or militant? The answer, as the ancients knew, lies in letting stone hold the full spectrum, because chisels, like history, can rewrite the rules one strike at a time. Imagine a priest pressing a golden adze to the lips of a stone pharaoh, whispering spells older than the pyramids themselves. This wasn't vandalism, it was the sacred opening of the mouth ceremony, and in that moment, the statue wasn't just a likeness. It breathed. Across ancient Egypt, sculpted mouths were ritually unsealed with tools that mimicked childbirth, a copper blade for the cutting of the umbilical cord, a forked instrument to open the jaws. Milk and honey might be dabbed onto stone lips, not as offerings but as sustenance. The result, a statue transformed into a vessel, its hollowed-out eyes now shimmering with quartz pupils that caught the lamplight like living flesh. This was art as alchemy, turning rock into a receptor for the divine. But Egypt wasn't alone in this belief. In Mesopotamia, the Mispie ritual took animation even further. Before a temple statue could be worshipped, it underwent a 9-day birth washed in river reeds like a newborn, dressed in royal linen, and finally awakened when priests pressed cedar resin into its nostrils. The scent, they believed, would lure the god's essence into the stone, and it worked. Records describe statues sweating, trembling, even speaking through oracles. One Babylonian text recounts a statue of the goddess Nanea refusing to be moved until her favorite harpist was summoned to play. These weren't metaphors. To worshippers, the deity was as present in that carved face as the air in their lungs. Now shift to India, where even today, temple murtis are treated as living guests. A bronze Shiva might be woken at dawn with bells, bathed in coconut water, and dressed in silk robes before being offered 3 meals a day, each dish fanned to cool it as one would for a king. In Kerala, the Thripunathura Pornathrayasa festival sees an elephant carrying a deity's statue through crowds so thick the air hums with devotion. The statue isn't just shown, it's experienced, its golden limbs swaying with each step of the beast beneath it. And here's the clincher. Priests annually open the statue's eyes with a needle dipped in honey, a ritual eerily echoing Egypt's mouth opening right across continents and millennia. Even the Greeks played this game. The Zonon primitive wooden statues of gods were said to have fallen from heaven. Athenians dressed their ancient olive wood Athena in a peplos woven by maidens, while on Rhodes, Helios's Colossus may have been designed to hold live fires in its upturned palms, turning it into a literal beacon. But the Romans took it furthest. During the Lectistonium, statues of gods were propped on couches alongside living senators, served full banquets on silver platters. Jupiter's statue might eat by having priests tilt his head forward, letting sacrificial wine drip onto his lips. The line between guest and god didn't just blur, it vanished. The most poignant examples come from Mexico. Aztec Texiptla weren't just effigies, they were stand-ins for deities chosen from prisoners or slaves. For a year, the chosen one would be dressed, fed, and revered as the god's embodiment until the festival day when their heart was offered to the sun. The statue and the sacrifice were 2 halves of the same ritual, one stone, one flesh, both equally real to worshippers. What's startling is how these practices persist. In Japan, the Ohaguro tradition sees Buddha statues' teeth painted black annually, mirroring an ancient beauty rite. In Sicily, lifelike mystery statues of saints are paraded through streets on shoulders, their glass eyes glinting with what locals swear are real tears. And in Haiti, voodoo practitioners still feed their LWA statues with rum and spices, whispering secrets to the clay. The takeaway: these statues weren't just admired. They were kept. Their rituals weren't theater, they were the operating system of belief, a way to make the intangible tangible. So next time you see a weathered museum piece, remember, to someone, somewhere, that stone once woke up hungry. Michelangelo's David didn't just emerge from marble, he stepped out of a dialogue with antiquity. That contrapposto stance, one hip slightly raised, the weight shifted onto the right leg. It's a direct descendant of Greek athletes like the Doraphoros, but with a Renaissance twist. Where ancient sculptors idealized perfection, Michelangelo carved tension. The veins in David's hand, the furrow in his brow, that moment before the stone leaves his sling. He didn't just borrow an ancient technique, he weaponized it, turning classical balance into psychological suspense. And here's the kicker: when you stand beneath David in Florence, your gaze travels up his towering form the same way an Athenians would have climbed the Parthenon's pediments, both artists forcing viewers into physical reverence. Fast forward to Picasso's Guernica, where the screaming horse and fractured bodies seem worlds away from serene Greek marbles, but look closer, those distorted faces. They're the spiritual heirs of Assyrian battle reliefs, where enemies' agonized expressions were exaggerated to haunt viewers. Picasso didn't invent emotional distortion, he tapped into a 3,000-year-old playbook for making horror visceral. Even his monochrome palette echoes Egyptian tomb paintings, where color wasn't needed when the message was this stark. Rodin took a different path. His thinker isn't just a man pondering, it's a modern take on the brooding Hellenistic seated boxer. Both sculptures use slumped shoulders and clenched fists to telegraph inner turmoil, proving that muscle could speak as loudly as words. But Rodin added something new: roughness. Where ancient artists polished surfaces to idealize, he left chisel marks visible, letting the raw stone shout about the struggle of creation. It's a rebellion that still nods to tradition, like a jazz musician riffing on a Bach fugue. Then there's Giacometti's Walking Man, his spindly figure striding into oblivion. At first glance, it's the antithesis of solid Roman emperors, but those elongated limbs. They're cousins to Gothic cathedral statues, where elongation symbolized spiritual yearning, and that pitted surface, it's the modern answer to Egyptian statues' deliberate erosion, both artists using texture to whisper about time's passage. Even pop art plays this game. Kuhn's balloon dog might seem like a shiny gag, but its inflated curves owe everything to Hellenistic wet drapery techniques, both turning something fluid into a permanent wink. And Hirst's The Virgin Mother, that towering pregnant figure with exposed anatomy. It's a cheeky inversion of ancient fertility idols, swapping sacred stone for clinical steel but keeping the primal awe. The real magic: these artists aren't copying, they're conversing. When Bourgeois sculpted her spider, she channeled the same protective terror as a Mesopotamian lamassu, both looming over viewers as hybrid guardians. And AI Huawei's dropping a Han Dynasty urn photos. They're the 21st century version of iconoclasm, where breaking art becomes part of its power, just like the missing noses of toppled pharaohs. So next time you see a modern sculpture that gives you chills, listen closely. That's not just steel or resin talking, it's the echo of a chisel striking marble in Athens, a mallet shaping obsidian in Tenochtitlan, a whisper across millennia saying, "We've always known how to make the inanimate feel alive." The chisel that struck the first blow on a block of Carrara marble wasn't just a tool, it was a time machine. Every chip and groove left behind tells a story of patience and precision. of artists who transformed rock into emotion with nothing but hand-held metal and muscle. The Egyptians used copper chisels softer than the granite they carved, which meant constant resharpening. Imagine the labor. A single statue's eyebrow might take weeks to perfect. Each stroke of the mallet, a whispered negotiation between artisan and stone. Yet these primitive tools birthed faces so lifelike, they still fool the eye into seeing warmth in cold quartzite. Then came the Greeks, who turned sculpting into a kind of alchemy. Their secret weapon, the pointing machine, an ancient 3D modeling system. Picture this, a wooden frame studded with adjustable rods, each one measuring precise points on a clay model. By transferring these measurements to marble with meticulous drills, artists could scale up small maquettes into towering masterpieces without losing an ounce of detail. It was the Pantheon's version of a photocopier, and it let workshops produce statues with near-industrial consistency. But here's the twist, these machines didn't stifle creativity. They freed it. With proportions pre-calibrated, sculptors could focus on the subtle stuff, the way a corner of the mouth might lift in a smirk or a vein throb in a tensed forearm. Drills changed the game too. Roman sculptors wielded bow drills like dentists' tools, hollowing out curls in marble hair or pupils in bronze eyes. The grooves they left weren't flaws, they caught light and shadow, giving wavy locks movement and making stone irises glint with simulated wetness. In India, artisans went further, using drills so fine they could pierce through jade to create chain links from a single block, each loop thinner than a grain of rice. These weren't just techniques, they were sleights of hand, convincing viewers that rigid mineral could flow like fabric or float like mist. But the real unsung heroes. The abrasives. Egyptian sculptors polished statues with powdered quartz, buffing limestone until it shone like moonlight. The Greeks used emery from Naxos, rubbing it into marble with leather to mimic human skin's poreless glow. And in Mesoamerica, obsidian blades sharper than modern surgical steel shaved basalt into feathered serpents so smooth they felt alive to the touch. The magic lay in knowing when to stop. Michelangelo famously said his job was to free the figure trapped in the marble, but every culture had its own philosophy. Chinese jade carvers worked slowly, letting the stone's natural veins guide their designs. Inuit soapstone sculptors prized sleeping lines, hidden fractures that dictated where to carve. And the Renaissance's obsession with unfinished non-finito statues. Those rough, emerging forms weren't abandoned. They were visual poems about creation itself, the moment when rock teeters between earth and art. Today, we laser scan and 3D print, yet these ancient methods still astonish. When a conservator recently recreated the missing nose of a pharaoh's statue using only period tools, the team discovered something wild. The original artisans had made microscopic mistakes on purpose, tiny asymmetries that, under sunlight, made the face seem to breathe. That's the real lesson here. These weren't just craftsmen. They were psychologists, physicists, and magicians, wielding chisels like wands and turning quarries into theaters of illusion. And every chip they left behind, that's the autograph of genius. That serene curve on the lips of an archaic Greek kouros isn't what you think. Modern viewers often call it a smile, projecting our own associations onto stone, but to its creators, that subtle upturn wasn't joy. It was a technical revolution, the first attempt to break the rigid symmetry of early sculpture and suggest breath beneath marble skin. The so-called archaic smile was less about emotion and more about animation, a visual trick to make static figures seem on the verge of speech. Even the placement mattered. These smiles often appeared on statues of young men, their faces frozen in eternal youth, hinting at vitality rather than happiness. It's a classic case of cultural misreading. where we overlay modern assumptions onto ancient craftsmanship, turning a sculptor's tool into a psychological statement. Then there's the myth of heroic nudity. Walk through any museum's Greek wing, and you'll see muscled warriors and gods carved in the buff, their idealized forms celebrated as symbols of virtue and strength. But here's the twist: nudity in antiquity was anything but universal. In Athens, only the elite athletes, gods, and aristocrats earned the right to be depicted unclothed. A laborer or merchant carved nude would have been laughable, even offensive. The naked body wasn't just art, it was a billboard of social hierarchy. And for every heroic Apollo, there were dozens of draped magistrates and armored kings, their clothing telegraphing status as clearly as a crown. Even the famed Discobolus, mid-throw and glistening, would have been understood by contemporaries less as a celebration of the human form and more as a marker of privileged leisure, a time to train, to compete, to exist outside the grind of daily toil. The misreadings grow thornier when politics enter the frame. Take the Roman practice of damnatio memoriae, where disgraced emperors' statues were defaced or destroyed. Modern scholars once assumed this was pure erasure, a literal chiseling away of history, but recent research suggests some mutilations were carefully selective, a nose hacked off to blind the statue's spirit, or genitals targeted to neuter its power. These weren't frenzied acts of vandalism, they were ritualized undoings as precise as the original carving. Yet for centuries, we interpreted these scars through a lens of barbarism, missing the nuanced dialogue between creation and destruction. Even materials get misjudged. The gleaming white marbles we associate with classical purity, they were once riotously painted, their colors faded by time and scrubbed away by overzealous restorers. The Victorians, steeped in ideals of austere beauty, couldn't fathom that Greek temples resembled carnival booths, so they whitewashed history, literally. Now, ultraviolet light reveals the truth. Eyelashes defined in lampblack, lips stained with cinnabar red, armor outlined in shimmering gold. Our reverence for monochrome masterpieces says more about 19th century tastes than ancient ones. The most persistent bias, gender. For decades, archaeologists labeled any robust female figurine a fertility goddess, reducing nuanced artistry to biological function. The Willendorf Venus's exaggerated curves were dubbed maternal, ignoring theories that she might represent a self-portrait by a woman artist, or even a coded map of celestial cycles. Meanwhile, lithe Minoan snake goddesses were dismissed as decorative, their power downplayed until fresco evidence revealed them as key figures in sacred rituals. Even today, museum placards often describe male statues as heroic and female ones as adorning, perpetuating divides the ancients might not have recognized. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies in humility. When we stare at these time-worn faces, we're not just seeing art, we're seeing mirrors. Our interpretations reveal far more about our own eras than about the hands that shaped the stone. The next time you catch yourself calling an archaic smile happy or a nude athlete free, pause. Behind every assumption is a chisel mark waiting to be re-examined, a history more tangled and far more fascinating than the labels we stick on it. Some statues didn't just stand in silence, they spoke. Deep within the great Sphinx's weathered pores, archaeologists discovered a hollow chamber, its walls precisely angled to amplify even the faintest whisper into an echoing command. This wasn't just architecture, it was acoustic engineering, turning stone into a megaphone for the divine. Imagine a priest's voice, low and resonant, funneled through hidden channels to erupt from the statue's mouth, not as human speech, but as the god's own thunder. The effect would have been chilling, a monolithic figure roaring to life, its words vibrating through the sand beneath worshippers' feet. The Greeks took this further with the talking statues of Delphi. The Pythia, oracle of Apollo, didn't just sit near the famous tripod. She was framed by a curved wall of porous limestone, its surface pocked with microscopic holes that absorbed and distorted sound. Pilgrims kneeling before her wouldn't just hear predictions, they'd experience them as disembodied echoes, the priestess's voice seeming to emanate from the statues around her. One surviving account describes a bronze Apollo whose lips never moved, yet whose hollow chest resonated with verses that visitors swore came from all directions at once. The secret, a network of bronze pipes connecting its base to a hidden chamber where priests could chant, their voices filtered through the metal to sound unearthly. But the true masters of sculptural acoustics were the Maya. At Chichen Itza, the stepped pyramid of Kukulkan isn't just a visual marvel, it's a sonic one. Clap your hands at its base and the echo doesn't just repeat, it chirps like the Quetzal bird, sacred to the feathered serpent god. The steps are designed as precise sound diffusers, each tread calibrated to fracture and reflect noise into avian cries. Stand at the right spot, and whispers from over 100 feet away reach your ears as clearly as if the speaker stood beside you. This wasn't decoration, it was theater. During ceremonies, priests could murmur from concealed niches, their words carried upward by the stone, making it seem as if the temple itself was alive and speaking. Even in death, sound sculpted belief. Egyptian false doors in tombs weren't just symbolic passages for the soul, their recessed panels acted as sound boxes. When mourners sang or poured libations, the vibrations would hum through the hollows, creating the illusion that the deceased was responding from the afterlife. In one Saqqara tomb, a narrow shaft runs from the statue's mouth to a hidden chamber beneath the floor. Pour water down it, and the resulting gurgle mimics human speech, a clever trick to convince visitors the dead could still advise the living. The most haunting examples come from Buddhist caves in China. At the Longmen Grottos, a 17-meter-tall Vairocana Buddha sits flanked by disciples, their mouths slightly open. When monks chant inside the chamber, low frequencies bounce between their carved lips, creating a chorus of phantom voices that seem to emanate from the statues themselves. Modern audio analysis reveals the niches were tuned to specific frequencies, likely hymns known only to the monastery's inner circle, turning prayer into surround sound divinity. What's astonishing is how these techniques still disorient us today. In Rome's Bocca della Verità, tourists giggle while testing the Mouth of Truth's legend, but few notice how the circular carving behind it funnels whispers to specific points in the piazza. And in Newgrange's Neolithic passage tomb, a creaking stone door once created eerie harmonics during solstice dawns, amplifying the rising sun's first light with an otherworldly hum. These artists didn't just carve shapes, they shaped air itself, proving that the most powerful sculptures aren't seen, they're heard, vibrating through bones long after the stone has gone silent. The moment a Greek artisan's chisel touched the sandstone of Gandhara, the Buddha's face changed forever. In the crossroads of ancient Bactria, where Persian caravans met Indian monks and Greek colonists lingered from Alexander's conquests, sculptors performed a quiet revolution. Suddenly, the serene features of the enlightened one bore the crisp eyelids and aquiline nose of Apollo, his robes cascading in Hellenistic folds that seemed damp with morning dew. This wasn't imitation, it was alchemy. The Greco-Buddhist statues of Afghanistan and Pakistan didn't just borrow techniques, they forged a new visual language where Mediterranean naturalism merged with South Asian spirituality. The Buddha's traditional top knot transformed into the wavy curls of a Greek athlete, his meditation pose gaining the anatomical precision of a discobolus at rest. Even the halo behind his head echoed the radiating crowns of Hellenistic sun gods, now repurposed as a symbol of divine illumination. Meanwhile, in Rome's bustling workshops, enslaved Greek sculptors were replicating their homeland's masterpieces with near religious fidelity. When a Roman aristocrat commissioned a copy of Praxiteles' Aphrodite, he wasn't just buying decor, he was importing cultural capital. These marble duplicates spread across the empire like a visual meme, from Spain's villas to Syria's trading posts. But here's the twist: Roman copies weren't slavish reproductions. A Greek original might be reinterpreted with a sterner expression for a military patron, or softened into maternal curves for a fertility shrine. The Farnese Hercules exaggerated every muscle to satisfy Roman tastes for heroic excess, turning subtle Greek idealism into a flex of imperial might. The Silk Road became a highway for these aesthetic exchanges. Chinese terracotta horses suddenly pranced with Hellenistic manes after contact with Greco-Bactrian stables. Persian reliefs began incorporating Greek three-quarter profiles, making figures seem to step out of palace walls. Even the colossal Buddhas of Bamiyan, tragically destroyed in 2001, once stood in modified contrapposto, their weight shifted like a Roman senator's. The most fascinating hybrids emerged in Egypt, where Ptolemaic artists merged pharaonic rigidity with Greek fluidity. A statue of Cleopatra might wear the traditional Egyptian headdress, but her lips curved with the knowing smile of a Hellenistic courtesan. This cross-pollination wasn't always peaceful. When Roman conquerors looted Greek bronzes, they melted down countless originals to mint coins, only to later commission copies in cheaper marble. Buddhist monks in Gandhara initially resisted depicting the Buddha in human form at all, preferring symbolic footprints or empty thrones. It took Greek-influenced artists to persuade them that enlightenment could wear a face. And sometimes the exchange flowed backward. Indian yoga poses appear in Pompeii's frescoes, while the flowing drapery of Gupta-era Buddhas may have inspired Byzantine depictions of Christ. The real magic happened in the margins. In Palmyra's desert oasis, local sculptors created a startling hybrid style, funerary portraits with Roman togas and Parthian hairstyles, their eyes carved with Syrian almond shapes yet gleaming with Greek-style glass pupils. In Japan's Horyuji Temple, a 7th-century bodhisattva stands with one hand raised in the Abhaya Mudra, the other clutching a lotus, but the folds of his robe ripple with the same precision as a Roman senator's toga. These weren't accidents, they were conscious choices by artists who saw the world as one vast workshop. What's astonishing is how these dialogues still resonate. Michelangelo studied Roman copies of Greek originals to carve his David, unknowingly completing a loop that began millennia earlier. Today's 3D printed replicas of looted artifacts continue the tradition, proving that sculpture has always been a conversation, one where techniques, like trade winds, carry ideas farther than their creators ever dreamed. Time hasn't been kind to stone. The same sunlight that once made Egyptian eyes gleam with quartz now bleaches pigments to ghosts. Humidity curls the edges of Mayan stelae like old parchment, and pollution etches acid tears down Gothic saints' cheeks. But where nature erases, technology now fights back, armed with lasers, algorithms, and a stubborn refusal to let these voices fade. In London's British Museum, a team recently aimed a 3D scanner at the Rosetta Stone, not to read its inscriptions but to listen. The device's laser pulses, bouncing back at trillionths of a second intervals, mapped pits and grooves invisible to the naked eye, traces of the original chisel strikes. Suddenly, they could tell whether a line was carved by a master's steady hand or an apprentice's hesitant tap, uncovering workshop secrets lost for 2,000 years. Across the Atlantic, at Mexico's Chichen Itza, Archaeologists are using photogrammetry to reverse time's damage. By stitching together thousands of overlapping photos under different lighting angles, they've reconstructed missing sections of the warrior's temple friezes with eerie precision. The key: shadow algorithms. By analyzing how light falls on surviving carvings, software can predict how lost portions once curved, like a linguist reconstructing a dead language from grammatical fragments. One reconstructed serpent's fang even revealed traces of original red pigment, not paint, but microscopic hematite particles still clinging to the stone's pores. But the real magic happens in the digital afterlife. When ISIS dynamited Palmyra's Arch of Triumph in 2015, it seemed like annihilation. Yet 2 years earlier, a team from Oxford had scanned the entire site with millimeter accuracy. Using those files, Italian engineers carved a replica from Egyptian marble, its every pockmark and weathering pattern duplicated by robotic chisels guided by ancient data. The replica now tours the world, not as a replacement but as a refugee, a monument rebuilt from the memory of light. Even failures become revelations. When a botched cleaning stripped the golden sheen off a Tang Dynasty horse's mane, conservators turned to synchrotron radiation, a particle accelerator technique, to analyze remaining flecks. The scans uncovered something astonishing. The gold wasn't leaf, but nanoparticles suspended in lacquer, a lost technique that gave the mane its wind-blown shimmer. Now, master artisans in Xi'an are relearning the recipe, mixing crushed gold with tree sap just as their ancestors did. The most poignant preservation happens in the shadows. At the Acropolis Museum, a glass floor reveals a hidden workforce rows of statues with missing limbs, their labels not bearing names but inventory numbers: Core 670, Kuros 272. These aren't discards, they're patients in slow recovery. Each fracture is documented with microscopic precision, not to hide the damage but to honor it. A Roman copyist might have smoothed over imperfections, but modern conservators leave repairs slightly visible, their epoxy a shade lighter than the original stone. These scars aren't flaws, they're the artwork's autobiography, proof it survived. What's truly being preserved isn't just form, but intention. When a 3D scan of Michelangelo's David revealed tool marks clustered at the brow, it confirmed Vasari's old tale that the artist spent weeks perfecting the eyes alone, knowing they'd draw viewers upward. And at Angkor Wat, LiDAR scans exposed hidden chisel grooves beneath collapsed towers, showing how Khmer architects subtly warped perspectives to make the king's statue appear larger from the main gate. Every scan, every pixel is a whisper from the workshop floor, a way to peer over the sculptor's shoulder across centuries. The irony: these silent stones are louder than ever. Digital archives let a student in Mumbai examine Ramses Kartaj at higher resolution than Howard Carter ever could. Augmented reality apps resurrect polychrome on bleached marbles with a phone tap. And when the Notre Dame fire threatened to erase its medieval sculptures, drones fitted with thermal cameras guided firefighters to save them not just as art, but as data points in a cloud that outlives cathedral walls. Perhaps this is sculpture's final evolution, no longer frozen in stone, but floating in light, waiting for the next generation to press play. Now that we've unraveled the secrets behind these ancient masterpieces, here's a challenge for you. Next time you step into a museum, don't just glance at a statue. Really look at it, stand before that carved figure, and let it speak to you. Does the tilt of its head suggest pride or exhaustion? Are the hands clenched in defiance or relaxed in peace? That slight curve of the lips, could it be serenity, or is there something more enigmatic hiding beneath the stone? Every fold of drapery, every shadow under a furrowed brow, is a word in a silent language waiting to be decoded. think of it like meeting a stranger. You wouldn't assume their story from a single glance. You'd study their posture, their expression, the way they hold themselves. A statue is no different. Take the dying Gaul in Rome. His slumped shoulders and downturned gaze aren't just artistic choices. They're an entire narrative of defeat and dignity carved into marble. Or the bust of Nefertiti in Berlin. Her raised chin and heavy-lidded eyes don't just show beauty. They radiate regal aloofness, as if she's still measuring visitors across 3,000 years. Here's the fun part: there are no wrong answers. Maybe you'll see sorrow in a Buddha's smile that others call tranquility, or detect a flicker of mischief in a Greek satyr's grin. That's the magic of these silent storytellers. They reflect back what we bring to them, and the more you practice, the louder they'll speak. Notice how light plays across the surface at different times of day, how the angle of a shoulder changes as you circle the figure. These artists designed their work to perform, and you're the audience. So go ahead, pick a statue, any statue, and let the conversation begin. Then share your discoveries in the comments. Did a medieval saint's weathered hands remind you of resilience? Did a roaring Assyrian lion make your pulse quicken? Your perspective might reveal something even experts have missed. After all, these sculptures have survived wars, plagues, and centuries of dust. They're used to waiting for the right listener to come along. From the subtlest furrow to the grandest colossus, ancient sculptures were masterclasses in unspoken communication. They distilled human essence into stone, making the intangible power, grief, divinity, tangible across millennia. These artists didn't just carve figures. They encoded entire philosophies into the arch of a brow, the tension of a wrist, the way light pooled in the hollow of a collarbone. Every choice, from material to posture, was a deliberate word in a visual vocabulary that transcended spoken language. Consider the quiet eloquence of a hand resting on a knee, simple, until you realize it's the exact gesture a pharaoh used to signal favor, or the way a Buddhist monk marks meditation. A slumping shoulder could carry the weight of defeat, while a raised chin might shout defiance louder than any battle cry. Even the unfinished surfaces, the rough-hewn backs of statues meant to stand against walls, whisper about practicality and perspective, reminding us that these works were never meant to be viewed in sterile isolation, but as living participants in bustling temples, crowded forums, and torchlit tombs. What's astonishing is how these silent conversations still unfold today. Stand before an Assyrian relief, and the precise muscles of a lion's haunches can make your own body tense in response. The delicate veins in a Roman emperor's marble hand might trigger an instinctive glance at your own pulse. That's the real magic. These sculptures don't just represent life, they provoke it, igniting mirror neurons across centuries. So the next time you lock eyes with a statue, don't just look, listen. Let the curve of a smile hint at lost rituals. Let the polish of 1,000 touching hands speak of enduring devotion. Let the cracks and repairs tell stories of survival. These works were never frozen. They were always in dialogue with their creators, their original audiences, and now with you. If this journey through stone and meaning has resonated with you, hit subscribe to keep unraveling history's hidden narratives. And down in the comments, we'd love to hear which sculpture's silent language speaks to you most powerfully. Is it the quiet wisdom of a Buddha's half-closed eyes, the electric tension of a Greek athlete mid-throw, or perhaps the haunting gaze of an Egyptian pharaoh still watching the horizon after all these years? Your perspective might just help someone else hear these ancient voices for the first time. That coiled beard on a Mesopotamian llama shoe isn't just decoration, it's a cipher. Each perfect ring, meticulously chiseled into stone, was a visual metaphor for the unbroken chain of divine wisdom flowing from the gods to their earthly representatives. The tighter the curl, the higher the rank. Even enemies who'd never seen a Babylonian king would recognize authority in those spiraled tresses, and that serpent slithering down the beard's length. That's no accident. It's Ningishzida, the god of vegetation and the underworld, his presence declaring that true power stretches from the roots of the earth to the heavens above. Now shift your gaze to an empty throne in a Gandharan relief. At first glance, it seems like a placeholder until you notice the footprints carved into its base, the cushion still indented as if just vacated. This was Buddhism's ultimate inside joke. The Buddha wasn't missing, he was everywhere. By leaving his seat warm but unoccupied, artists turned absence into a presence more tangible than any statue. Even the throne's decorations whispered secrets: lotuses for purity, wheels for dharma, and sometimes a single begging bowl placed beside it, a humble reminder that enlightenment wears no crown. Egyptian sculptors played similar games. A pharaoh's false beard wasn't just about masculinity, its straight, plated form mirrored the Osirian dreads of the underworld god Osiris. But here's the twist: only gods and deceased rulers wore this rigid style. Living pharaohs sported curved beards, creating a visual distinction between mortal and divine rule. Even the material mattered. Gold-leafed beards on statues weren't just opulent, they mirrored the flesh of the gods described in pyramid texts, turning the ruler's face into a literal mirror of the divine. Don't overlook the humble staff in Greek art either. Hermes Caduceus with its entwined snakes seems like a simple herald's tool until you realize the serpents form a DNA-like double helix, symbolizing the balance of opposites. Athena's spear, planted upright in the ground, transforms into an olive tree in some myths, its sudden foliage a reminder that true strategy bears fruit. And Dionysus's Theseus, that fennel stalk capped with a pine cone, wasn't just a party prop. The cone's Fibonacci spirals mirrored the patterns of cosmic creation, making the god of ecstasy also a secret mathematician. The Aztecs hid their own symbols in plain sight. The feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl's rattlesnake tail isn't just fearsome, each scale is a tiny knife, representing the dual nature of wisdom, enlightening yet cutting. His flint tongue flicks out not to intimidate but to speak the sharp truths that shape civilizations. Even his plumes are color-coded: turquoise for the sky, green for fertile earth, red for lifeblood, a wearable map of the cosmos. Christian sculpture is riddled with these coded details too. A medieval saint holding a tiny church model isn't just marking their patronage. The building's orientation often mirrors the actual cathedral housing the statue, creating a sacred feedback loop. The skull beneath Mary's foot in Piet Essenes isn't merely morbid. It's frequently carved with Adam's distinct brow ridge, linking Christ's sacrifice to humanity's original sin. Even the folds of Jesus' shroud in resurrection statues follow the exact drapery patterns of Roman togas, subtly declaring him the ultimate statesman of the soul. The most delightful symbols are the playful ones, the hidden self-portrait of sculptor Gian Lorenzo Bernini, peeking out from the drapery of his David, smirking at his own audacity. The tiny snail creeping up the base of Donatello's Mary Magdalene, a silent nod to humility's slow but steady victory over vanity. Or the Maori tiki figures with their third eye carved on the forehead, visible only from above, a wink to the gods that mortals weren't meant to see. What's astonishing is how these symbols transcend cultures. The empty center of a Zen garden's raked gravel mirrors the Buddha's vacant throne. The Celtic green man's foliage spewing mouth echoes the Aztecs' flowering war gods. Even modern superhero statues sneak in these traditions. Superman's cape folds often mimic Baroque angels, while Black Panther's necklace of teeth is a direct homage to Benin ivory regalia. So next time you face a statue, don't just stand back, lean in. That crack in the stone might be a carefully carved lightning bolt of divine wrath. Those random notches on a hero's shield could be constellations from the night of his greatest victory. Every chip and groove is a breadcrumb left by artists who knew their work would outlast empires, trusting that someday someone like you would pause and decipher their silent shout across the centuries.